All right. So today's question is, should Christians imitate Jesus's washing of the disciples' feet? Like, is foot washing the third ordinance after baptism and the Lord's Supper? And then should we regularly be imitating Jesus when in John 13, he washes the disciples' feet? Should we be doing that as a remembrance and that symbol, that meaning that he did there? That's the question for today. And I'll say this, give you the answer, what I think, and I'll give you the argument. So I think Christians can do that, to picture that, but I wouldn't place it on the same level as ordinance, that order command, as the Lord's Supper and baptism. And I'll give you the reasons why or why not and how close we can get to that answer. But maybe you don't even know what I'm talking about. What is John 13 talking about? What does Jesus washing the disciples' feet even mean? So let's get that first, and then we'll get into the particulars. Because if you get the meaning of the passage, then you'll figure out how to apply it, and I'll give you some more application. Because it goes beyond just the ceremony of foot washing. I think that's the point of really baptism and the Lord's Supper goes beyond the mere ceremony. You have to actually know what the ceremony is meaning, or the ordinance, or all those words. Anyways, this is John 13, 1. It says, before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So this is the beginning. The beginning of the end, right? He's going to the cross. He's about to die for the sin of the world. He's about to die for his friends, his disciples. He loved the world to the end, which is a reference, John 19:30, at the end of his life. It says this in John 19:30. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished. It is the end." Then bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. So in John 13, he's definitely looking to the cross. All right, so we have that connection there. And then we read later on in John 13:8, it says, Jesus replied, he's washing the disciples' feet, and Peter, we'll see what he says. So Jesus replied, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me. All right, so there's a deeper meaning than just the foot washing. It's having to do with like being with Jesus. And so because Simon said, no, you can't do that. I'm unworthy. Like, you're too great to wash my feet, right? So Jesus like, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me. And Simon Peter says in verse 9, Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. And he says, one who has bathed, Jesus told him, doesn't need to wash anything except his feet, but he is completely clean. So what does this mean? Like one commentator, Craig Coester, says this, therefore to say that all the disciples needed no further bathing, but did need to have Jesus wash their feet, means that they need the love and self-sacrifice that the foot washing signifies. All right, so they need to be washed. What the symbol of the foot washing is pointing to Jesus' death and resurrection for the forgiveness of sins, that he's going to wash them clean with his spilled blood, with his death. And so we've already seen how he's pointing to his death at the beginning, where he's loving them to the end. Now we see another example that if you go back in verse 4, we see another connection to Jesus laying down his life and raising it up again. In John 13:4, Jesus introduced it this way. He says, so he got up from supper, he laid aside his outer clothing and took a towel and tied it around himself. Notice the phrasing, laid aside his outer clothing and took a towel. All right, so same words used in John 10:17 when he prophesied his death. In John 10:17, he says, this is why the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. So he's laying aside his clothing and taking up a towel. So he's going to lay down his life and going to take it up again. And you can go, there's a whole bunch of other symbols that you could point to Jesus' death, but we'll just go with those two right there. And You can talk about what his death does. It cleanses people, right? So they have a lot of connections to his death here of the good news of the gospel. And then in John 13:14 again, he tells us this after he washes them. He says in John 13:14, so if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you also should do just as I've done for you. And so now there's basically two elements of Jesus' washing their feet. Is one, he's pointing to their death, that he's going to wash them clean from their sin through his death and resurrection. And also we want to imitate him in his service. As Jesus sacrificed himself and died to love other people, we selflessly, sacrificially love others. And so this is one way this phrase is used of washing. It's not just washing feet. It's not just doing the ceremony, right? But the ceremony points to how you should live from your whole life. Because it says this in 1 Timothy 5:10 about how Christian widows are supposed to live. And it says this, is well known for good works. That is, if she has brought up her children, shown hospitality, and here it is, washed the saints' feet, helped the afflicted, and devoted herself to every good work. It seems like a metaphor or, synonymous with helping others, serving others, being hospitable, helping the afflicted, washing their feet. It could be, literal, but it could also be more figurative of serving others, is what I think Jesus is trying to say, which he says other places. Now, should we do this as an ordinance? Should we do this every Sunday? I'm not convinced of that yet, and here's some reasons why I don't think it's to that level. I think it's a good metaphor, a good symbol, a good rite. We could use we'll go into what those different words may mean, but one pause is we don't see in the New Testament where in Acts we see them reading the word, taking the Lord's Supper, sharing the gospel. We don't ever see them having anything, and they did the ceremony of foot washing, right? We see baptism, but we don't have this mention of that. So there is some gray area. It does seem like the early church in Acts was not doing that. And then even later after Acts, the church fathers, I want to do further study in this, but they don't seem to put it on the same place as baptism and the Lord's Supper. They may practice it, some of them, like Augustine and Ambrose, and they mention it, but it doesn't seem like the same level as the Lord's Supper and baptism. Even though Jesus does say, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I've given you an example that you should also do as I have done for you. So you can understand, it does seem like a command to kind of memorialize this as a sign of his death and his service. So, but there is still some gray area. And I found a quote that I think, if you're still sticking with me, we're already 8 minutes in, so we're getting into the weeds here. This might help us distinguish these terms. All right. So in Augustus Hopkins Strong Systematic Theology, that's a name, Augustus Hopkins Strong, my goodness. All right. He says that this is how he defines an ordinance. He says, by the ordinances, we mean those outward rites which Christ has appointed to be administered in his church as visible signs of the saving truth of the gospel. They are signs in that they vividly express this truth and confirm it to the believer. Now, some might say that the foot washing in John 13 doesn't explicitly show the gospel. It's more of service and humility. While I think there's definitely service and humility, I think you can make a really good case that it is the gospel, that it's pointing to his death, it's pointing to his cleansing power. So I think you could say it is a visible sign of the saving truth of the gospel in that act. All right. Now, he goes on he says it would be well to distinguish from one another the three words. He says symbol, rite, and ordinance. So he says a symbol is the sign or visible representation of an invisible truth or idea. As for example, the lion is the symbol of strength and courage. The lamb is the symbol of gentleness. The olive branch is peace. The scepter is of dominion. The wedding ring of marriage, and a flag of a country. Now, symbols may teach great lessons, as Jesus curses the barren fig tree, taught the doom of unfruitful Judaism, and Jesus' washing of the disciples' feet. So he mentioned Jesus washing the disciples' feet in terms of a symbol, all right? It's Jesus washing the disciples' feet taught his own coming down from heaven to purify and save. So even Strong would say the washing of the feet is symbolic of salvation in some way. It is showing that Jesus, I heard Mike Winger talk about also the symbolism of he's taking off his outer garment, like Jesus came from heaven to earth as a servant, right? You see that that in there as well. Anyways, so he places it under the category of symbol, all right? It's the symbol of purify and save and the humble service required to his followers. He puts it under the first word, symbol. Now the next one is a rite. A rite, R-I-T-E, is a symbol which is employed with regularity and sacred intent. All right? A symbol which is employed with regularity and sacred intent, which I might be leaning towards the washing of the disciples' feet under more of a rite. I think it's more than a symbol, especially with Jesus's, do this as an example kind of thing. I give this to you as an example. So symbols became rites when thus used. So examples of authorized rites in the Christian church were the laying of hands of ordination. So we lay on the hands to symbolize that we're sending them out, that God's blessing on them when we ordain them for a particular service or send them out as missionaries, and giving the right hand of fellowship, which I didn't even read that the first time. So that's not only that's even in the Bible, right? Like they don't shake hands. Anyways, maybe they do, maybe they don't. He's saying, all right, these are rites, a symbol that we kind of use regularly, all right, with sacred intent. And then the third one is an ordinance, which we've been talking about, Lord's Supper and baptism. He says an ordinance is a symbolic rite, so it's those other two, which sets forth a central truth of the Christian faith, not just like the right hand of fellowship or not just ordination. So it has to have the central truth of the Christian faith, which I would say washing of the feet does when Jesus is doing that, which is of universal and perpetual obligation. So that's where I'd say the ordinance, I was like, I'm not sure I can understand Jesus maybe setting an example for us to be like live as servants, not necessarily saying do this exact thing. So there's still some gray area on that. So I wouldn't say it's a necessary, universal, and perpetual obligation. I think it would be a good symbolic rite to do every so often. My tradition has been in the Southern Baptist Church, and we would do this occasionally at different special services. We would do it, as part of a youth group. The past couple of years, or this past year, actually, just the last year, we did at our church hand washing. So taking, just to kind of updating it and making it more for our current culture, where I feel like in Jesus' time, foot washing would have been normal, where they would normally go into a house and you would have servants wash your feet because your feet are dirty. That would have not been awkward. That would have been normal, right? In our time and place, that taking off your shoes and have somebody wash your feet would be awkward. It would not be very normal. And so to trying to bridge the gap, we just said, hey, let's do the symbol of washing and humility and service, just washing of the hands. It makes it easier practically. It's less awkward. It's still different because people don't usually wash each other's hands, but I think it went well. And so that's what we're going to do this year on this Thursday before Easter. Maundy Thursday has been celebrated for a number of years. I got some information. Let's see. It says the ceremony washing of feet was first attested by Augustine in connection with Easter baptism, the association of the rite with Maundy Thursday, that Latin commandment that Jesus gives to love one another. They would do it on Thursday. That Maundy Thursday, as we're doing, was fixed by the Council of Toledo in 694. So it has a long history of that. But I'm just doing it kind of more of a symbol It's not an ordinance. It's saying, hey, this is a good reminder for us of what Jesus did. And this is good for us to live out this service. So, should Christians practice foot washing as an ordinance? I'm not at the level of ordinance where we do it every Sunday or quarterly or anything like that. But just a special occasion. I don't think it's commanded necessarily. Maybe I'll get there at some point. But I think it's a good illustration to do, good example, a good symbol. So if you have symbol, right, ordinance, those definitions, I would put it in symbol, maybe a right there. So further study on this, the history of interpretation would be interesting. If you have any questions or I missed something, let me know. Hope this was interesting and not too boring, but there you go. Jesus washing the disciples' feet in John 13.